Talk Shoes.
Recorded live.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Travis and Vic's Drunken Horror Adventures. We've got our buddy Blake on the line, and I tell you what, guys, I'm sitting in the basement, and I just feel like this feels like 2 years ago or so whenever we had to get together. It was the first time we ever talked to you, Blake. It was when Wes Craven passed away, and now, we're missing another horror icon after George Romero passed a couple days ago.
Yeah, it's rough, man. I think events like this really pull people in the horror community together more so than usual.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Vic has always stated that he's not a zombie guy, but I think Vic was just as affected by this as anybody else who is a zombie guy. Vic, I think you first heard about it when I messaged you about it. I mean, I know you weren't all that surprised, but I know it hurt.
It did, man. And, I mean, I've told you for a while now that I knew it was coming and knew it was coming and knew it was coming. But when it happened, I was still shocked and upset and, just thinking about it. I mean, I'm just happy I finally got to meet him last year, and I got to shake his hand and thank him for everything he did for the horror community.
Yeah, for sure. So, a lot of times you'll pour one out for the homies or toast to the homies. Well, in this case, I've saved my drink till just now, and I'm going to take a drink in the honor or in the memory of George A. Romero. And for me, the A stands for awesome. So here we go. Anyway, so I first met George Romero, and it's the only time I got to meet him. It was 6 years ago at Scarefest in Lexington. And Vic, it's just like with Richard Brooker. You take things for granted. I mean, when I met Romero, his hands were shaking. I just didn't know how much longer he'd be around. He just didn't look good. But, I think that's because he was a smoker, which ultimately led to his downfall. But, I mean, he didn't look good at the time, so I wasn't sure how much longer he'd be around. He was about 71 at the time, and he made it to 77. And honestly, I think he lived a full life. Blake, I mean, how did you feel when you heard about, what happened on Sunday? It was Sunday, right? I believe it was Sunday.
Sunday. Yeah, I heard about his death and then the death of Martin Landau within an hour or two of each other. And I was like, damn, both of them. I mean, 2017, you can stop blowing ass anytime you're ready,
Yeah, everybody talked about 2016, but 2017's blowing it out of the water as far as
I've known some people in my career in the industry, that have worked with George. I've never got the chance to meet George or anything like that, but he wasn't the pioneer of the zombie genre. There were some before him, but he was the one that revitalized it and kind of made it what became sort of the modern fictional zombie format. He kind of revolutionized it and updated it, brought it, more to the masses in a more mainstream form. So I don't know. I felt really bad. The last thing of his that I watched was with my wife. Actually, we did a double feature of Creep Show and Monkey Shines. And that
That's
was
awesome.
the last things that I watched, and she was a big fan. And when I told her that he had passed away, she just had that sort of regretful look. Same way she looked when we found out that Wes died. That same sort of look. So I was like, well, here's another one. But he influenced informed the modern genre, zombie film, and lived to see a couple of his films remade actually fairly well. So I think that's quite an accomplishment,
Yeah, it's rare that happens, to be honest with you. And, here's the thing with Romero. You talked about how he maybe didn't invent the zombie, but he became, he revolutionized the zombie. That's absolutely true, because if you go back and watch, old movies from the 30s or 40s, they have zombies, but it's a completely different type of zombie. It's like a slave zombie. It's kind of voodoo related. It's not anything like this. It's not anything like this undead, shoot them in the head thing. And let's face it, I mean, from Night of the Living Dead, they weren't even zombies. They were called ghouls at the time. They didn't become what we call zombies until after that. But, I mean, it was Night of the Living Dead that, kind of started it all. And now zombies are such a huge deal. That's why when Vic and I, we did a most important horror movies of all time list on YouTube once upon a time, and I had Night of the Living Dead right at the top of the list because as far as subgenres go, I mean, there's got to be nothing bigger than the zombie subgenre right now.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Every time I turn around, there's a new sort of zombie thing coming out, and he was actually working on releasing another film. You know, it was in pre-production when he passed away, and the producer said they're going to try to continue on and finish it. You know, so he was still working on zombie stuff up till the day that he died. You know.
Yeah, isn't it like Road of the Dead or Road?
Yeah,
Road
like
of the
Dead. And you know what? It's so weird because I don't know if you or Vic saw it. I'm old enough to remember it, and I think the two of you guys remember it too. When Resident Evil 2 came out, there was a live-action trailer that was shown in Japan, and he filmed it. It had Brad Renfro as Leon S. Kennedy, and then some other lady who played Claire, and it was so good that Capcom approached him to do a script and a screenplay for a Resident Evil film. Well, he turned it down at the time and said, "I'm kind of done with zombies right now, and I for sure don't want to tackle anything that I didn't make," you know, meaning he wanted, you know, ownership and creative right. Well, later he relented, and he wrote a screenplay for the first Resident Evil movie, and then it was turned down in favor of Paul W.S. Anderson. So I would actually really wish we could have seen his take. It probably would have been a lot closer to the games, because that trailer he shot for Resident Evil 2 was damn right on the money, man. It gave me chill bumps when I watched it.
I totally believe that too. And Vic and I have talked about this in the past. Those games or the movies are action based. The game was horror based. So
right.
If we could have gotten what Romero wrote, I think those movies would have been so much better. But you know, live and let live. We didn't get what we wanted, and that's kind of how it goes.
Right,
but you know, we did get a couple of other zombie movies.
That's true, but I mean, if you think about it, Resident Evil itself was indirectly informed from Night of the Living Dead. I mean, without Night of the Living Dead and George Romero, I don't think Resident Evil or you know, Silent Hill or any of those other games would have even come out, because he was such an inspiration to that genre. It just inspired. I'd even venture to say Doom maybe is also sort of informed by, you know, the dark setting with the flashlights and the monsters, and he kind of indirectly influenced a whole genre of games, zombie shoot 'em ups and stuff, you know.
So we're going to kind of take a step. We're going to look at the broad picture, and then we're going to get into like specifics about his career. But one thing I wanted to kind of throw out, I'll start with Vic. I love this roundtable format that we always have, but I'm going to throw this out to Vic too, because I've been thinking about this over the last couple of days. And my opinion is this: while I think, and this is my opinion, I think John Carpenter's the greatest horror director to ever live. You know, and you put Craven there too. I think Romero is the most influential in terms of a subgenre ever. Yes, you had Carpenter with Halloween. Yes, you had Tobe Hooper with Texas Chainsaw. Yes, you had Wes Craven with Nightmare, or Sean Cunningham with Friday the 13th, all that BS. But you're talking about a guy who started the zombie subgenre, or at least for what it is now, and then he continued on with, 6 movies? 6 movies after, or I mean 6 overall, 6 zombie movies of the Dead series. And, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he's the most influential in terms of the subgenre of all time. Vic, I'll throw that out to you. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, during our podcast about all the Dead movies, I said it, and I think I kind of shocked you when I said it, but I think he is the most important director for horror. He's done more for horror. Like, he brought it to the forefront for everything, and without him, I really don't know where horror would have went. I mean, outside of the slasher craze, whatever, but George Romero is the guy when it comes to, when you think about zombies, there's no other, you don't think about anything else. And just to talk about what Blake was talking about with Resident Evil, I mean, Resident Evil 2 is my favorite game of all time. And I absolutely think Romero for the whole zombie thing, because that game wouldn't exist. There's no doubt in my mind it wouldn't exist. So I thank him for that as well. But, yeah, he's definitely the most influential director out there.
What about you, Blake? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I agree that for the especially for the zombie subgenre, yes, he is the most important director of all time for that, because nothing that came later would have been what it was without him. I even would venture to say that a lot of the slasher stuff, the way that the camera angles were shot, the documentary kind of feel to some of it, the jump cuts and stuff, and a lot of the things that he used as a filmmaker, I'm not even just talking about his writing skill, but just his skill as a filmmaker, were used. Evil Dead used the jump cuts and the documentary feel. A lot of the Friday the 13th films did it. And then, all the stuff like VHS, all that stuff is even indirectly influenced by him. There's some zombie stuff in the first VHS film that owes a big debt to Romero because of the makeups, the way they looked, the movement of the zombies, because he sort of pioneered the zombie sort of slow walk it kind of thing. Later on they sped up some, but he sort of pioneered the slow walking kind of, zombie thing. So yeah, I agree. As far as zombie stuff and subgenre, he is probably the most important director of all time.
And on top of that, it's kind of the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet. Vic and I aren't a big fan of it anymore. I know at one point I liked it. Vic never did. But let's be honest, Walking Dead, think about how huge of a cultural phenomenon that show is. And we know that show wouldn't exist, especially in its form now, if it wasn't for George Romero. Even the people involved in it, like Greg Nicotero, worked on Day of the Dead. Things like that. All these, it's kind of like he also has a learning tree underneath him. Nicotero and Tom Savini, they come from that learning tree. Then you had Ken Foray as an actor. Just different people that worked under Romero. And then you had all these horror directors that were influenced by him. If you don't believe it, go on Twitter, go on Facebook, look at what they had to say about Romero's passing. We're talking about people like Eli Roth. He's, not to my knowledge, he's never made a zombie movie, but he knows the importance of the Romero zombie movies because horror just wouldn't be what it is without that, right?
Right. And you're talking about Savini and Nicotero and a lot of the others. Well, the success of Creepshow, which obviously was written by Stephen King but directed by Romero, it was so successful that it led to the creation of Tales from the Dark Side. And Steve Johnson, my good pal Steve Johnson, he worked on those. So Romero served as an executive producer on those and actually wrote 4 of those episodes of that television series. Fantastic. His tree and how far he reaches,
Yeah. Exactly. It's just crazy to think about. We talk about this type of stuff in like sports all the time. Coaching trees, this coach has all these coaches underneath him, and then they become head coaches. It's kind of the same thing with Romero, because even if you look at Savini did the remake of Night of the Living Dead, and it was a good remake, and this was before the time of most remakes.
Right.
It was post Thing and post Blob, but for the most part, we weren't getting remakes in 1990,
Not at all.
So we'll talk about the beginning with Romero with Night of the Living Dead, and to me it's not just the zombie thing, and I'm sure this had been done before, but I always trace movies like this back to Night of the Living Dead. It's not just the zombie thing; it's the isolated feeling of a bunch of characters who are in a place, in this place, an abandoned farmhouse. And they can't work together. They're not working together properly. And if they would have survived. But in the end, it ends up bad because they couldn't work together. It kind of reminds me of like Dog Soldiers was influenced by Night of the Living Dead. There's a bunch of others. Blake, can you think of some others that were influenced in that type of way?
Oh yeah. Like I said, even for just games, the beginning of the first Resident Evil, they're stuck in the middle of a field after the helicopter flies off and leaves them. So then they run to this abandoned mansion. Hello, that's obviously a direct nod to Romero. And then Cabin Fever, that isolated kind of feeling, Eli Roth Cabin Fever. I'd even venture to say Frozen, up to a certain aspect, the isolation aspect of it, for sure. And even Hatchet, the isolation, the farmhouse, the old abandoned structure, the setting being at night. The darkness kind of playing as, like a character itself. And it's ridiculous, man, how far his reach goes. And I didn't know it till recently, but he actually made a cameo appearance in Silence of the Lambs. Did you know that?
Yes. Yeah, I just found that out recently too. He plays a security guard in the